guys, welcome to my session, which is called Business Central Upgrade Smooth Ride to Extensions. My name is Erma Zemaityte, and I have around 8 years of experience working with Microsoft Dynamics NAV, well, Business Central lately, and for 3.5 years, I have been working as project manager at a company called Simplanova, which specializes in upgrades. So naturally, today in my session, I have wanted to share all my experience about the upgrades. I have been working with upgrades to extensions over the year now, and obviously we had some challenges, as did everyone else, because programming language is different, right? The whole process is different. But from all of those challenges, what we have today is a lot of lessons learned, a lot of practices, tools that I can recommend, tips and tricks, right? And that is basically the things that I will talk about today. I will go through the whole upgrade process, starting with the estimate, and at every phase of upgrade, I will be sharing these useful tips and tricks, tools, and best practices from a technical point of view with you. Okay, let's start with the estimate. First things first, solution cleanup. For those of you who have attended directions online this year, I have also noticed that this was mentioned a lot in the sessions there. Solution cleanup is very recommended, and it's a very great thing if you want a cheaper and less time-consuming upgrade. Pretty much every solution, I believe, most definitely has some objects that are not used, that were maybe created for testing purposes, or maybe they were created a long time ago and everybody just forgot about them. So what you should do before the estimate process, or as my practice shows, it is also sometimes done after the estimate process, when client sees that the price and time needed for the upgrade is way higher than expected. So what you should do is clean up your solution, because you can expect better performance. Obviously, the smaller the extension, the better performance you will receive, and is a manageable solution. It will be way easier to debug your extension, to develop on the top, once you only have what you actually need in your solution. I know that there might be different levels of solution cleanup, and if you do not have a lot of time and resources to go through every customization and to review everything, at least consider a couple of things. So first thing, as I have already mentioned, is to review custom objects and remove those who are not which are not actually used anymore. And the other thing, please look into those upgrade to extensions painful areas, which is basically file management, .NET libraries, automations. If you do use those things in your solution, those will most probably be very time consuming to upgrade to extensions. And in this case, you should review if those are actually used, and if they are used, maybe they might be replaced with standard functionalities in Business Central. Common example, Excel. If you're using Excel automation or Excel .NET library to export data, for example, right? Maybe this functionality can be replaced by just simple standard export to Excel in Business Central. Okay, once you have your solution cleaned up, I have noticed that it is sometimes a difficult decision for most of our clients to decide the proper target version for the extension. And I would like to mention a common misunderstanding, actually, that the higher target version you choose, the more time it will take to upgrade. I would say that talking about extensions, this is actually the other way around. in Business Central 17, we do have a lot more events that we can subscribe to. We do have a lot more features, and everything is way more easier to extend, right? So basically, if you are moving to Business Central 17, your upgrade will be easier and will take less time compared to moving to Business Central 14 extension. One more thing that you should consider is, of course, add-ons availability. If you are using some add-ons in your solution, you should contact add-on provider and check which Business Central versions are supported by the add-on, right? And if your add-on is not yet available for Business Central 17, for example, add-on providers should give you information when you can expect it to be available, so you can plan your upgrade time schedule upfront based on that information. Also, of course, Windows client or web client. If your client absolutely requests to only use Windows client, then you do not really have another choice but Business Central 14. But if web client is fine, then you can choose from every other version of Business Central. And again, I personally recommend latest one, which is currently Business Central 17. Once you have your Business Central version already picked out, you will most probably consider to move to either on-premise or on cloud. What should be considered here? First of all, file management, .NET libraries, automations, as I have already mentioned, they are the most time-consuming parts of upgrade to extension. And even though they do require some refactoring and reimplementation in on-prem version, but they are even more limited in cloud. So you should look into those functionalities if you're using them, and what are you using exactly, and if those libraries, for example, will be available on cloud. Because otherwise it is very possible that you will have to say goodbye to some of your customizations if you're moving to cloud version. Database size, quite obvious. We all know that Microsoft has this recommendation that if you're moving to cloud, your database should be up to 80 gigabytes, and one company should not exceed the limit of 30 gigabytes. Of course, it does not mean that you cannot move to cloud if you have a bigger database, but you should have in mind that there will be additional costs for this. And amount of modifications in standard code. What I mean by that is, if your solution modifies standard quite heavily, and I mean modifications that are not really separated from standard code, but for example, modifying standard if statements or commenting out standard code, these things will be not moved to extensions, right? If you want to have the same modification in your extension, you will most probably have to modify base app. If you don't want to modify base app, and on cloud you cannot modify base app, you will have to spend quite some time to re-implement the whole functionality, rethink the whole thing, so that your customization, your functionality, your feature would work the same way as it did before, but without modifying the standard code. Once you have selected on-prem or on-cloud version, if you have selected on cloud, you will most probably also consider moving to app source. So here you should also consider a few more things that will require additional time. Communication with Microsoft. You will have to start communication quite soon, because it takes time, to select and agree with Microsoft on ranges for your solution, on name, and all the similar things. Also, automated tests. your solution will have to be covered in a lot of automated tests, and they are quite time consuming to write actually. And of course also marketing of your brand new app. So I hope that these things will help you to select the proper target version. And now we will move on to preparation stage. I personally do believe that this stage is most important in the whole upgrade process. If you have planned everything thoroughly, if you have prepared, if you know the biggest challenges, the biggest risks for an upgrade project, then most probably everything will go smoothly. You will not have to move a delivery date, which no one likes, right? You will not have any unexpected challenges during the upgrade. So please take some time, plan and prepare, and only then start your upgrade project. And what can I recommend for preparation? I have a checklist of a few things here. So first of all, what you should decide internally. And what I mean by decide internally is that this thing only is important for the team that is working on the upgrade. It will not affect a client in any way. So you should just decide internally, first of all, if you will be using server or Docker container for your upgrade, right? I will not get into details on how to set up both of these because we do not have that much time, but I have links that actually contains a detailed explanation step by step on how to set up Business Central database and connect everything on both server and Docker container. But what I will mention here is that my practice shows that it is best to use Docker container for smaller solutions. I have noticed that if you have a large database or if you have a lot of objects in your solution, then Docker container is not exactly that suitable because it actually takes a lot of server resources. And also, if you are new to this, if you have not used Docker containers before, it will obviously be way easier to set up everything on server because everything will be in the same place as you're used to. You will just have to restore the database, connect the server instance. The one new step is connecting a web service, but basically you will have a familiar infrastructure and you will not have to learn many new things on how to use Docker containers, right? I also have some screenshots here. So basically it shows how to connect your AL project to Docker container and to server. First of all, if you decide to use Docker container, you should check your launch.json file in your AL project, and you should make sure that server parameter is set to your Docker container IP address. Server instance should also be filled in, and BC is a default name for Business Central server instance when you create a Docker container for Business Central database. And for authentication, we are usually using user and password for Docker containers because when you are creating your Docker container, you can also just type in the information of what username and what password you would like to use. So that's quite simple. If you decide to stay on server and connect your AL project to server, you should also obviously type in server IP address, server instance, and for authentication, we are using Windows. Why? If you want to have your database, your server instance, your web service on server, but you want to develop internally, you want to install Visual Studio Code and do all the development, publishing, and all of those things on your computer, and you most probably do want that because if all the developers will go and start developing on the server, it will actually take a lot of server resources. So if you want to develop internally, locally on your computer, but publish everything to server, you should open up a port to your server so that it would be actually accessible from the outside. And then you should use CMD command, which will call Visual Studio Code and connect to Visual Studio Code using your server authentication. Once you have that done, you should also change one parameter in custom settings configuration file. That parameter is developer services enabled. If you will have this set to false, you will not be able to access your server instance and your database from the outside. So please make sure that this is set to true. One more thing that you have to decide internally before starting the upgrade is source control. As we already all know, most probably, source control is a must for extension projects. And there is a lot of information of alternatives, what repositories can you use, what Git extensions can you use. And from my side, I would like to recommend Azure DevOps. We are using it to create a project, and we're using it as objects repository, but of course you can use other platforms like GitHub, for example. And you will most probably also want Git extension installed in your Visual Studio Code so that it would be easier to work with the repository, right? The ones that I can recommend is Git Lens and Git extensions. Git Lens, you can see a screenshot on the left. It is integrated in Visual Studio Code itself. So basically when you open the object, for example, in the object itself, you will see that it was changed, what changes were made, who made them, when, and things like that. You can push, pull, commit, see the history of changes, all in Visual Studio Code. Git extensions, on the other hand, has a separate interface. And if you are new to using source control, to using Git, I do actually recommend this Git extensions tool because it has a separate interface, which is very user-friendly, I would say. You can see all the actions nicely laid out with the names. All the branches are listed in this interface. And if this is a new thing for you, then you will most probably be a little bit more comfortable with this user-friendly interface. And besides those things, there are also other things that should be decided but communicated to a client also. Since I have already mentioned that this is a brand new process and some clients don't really know what to expect from this upgrade, I think that you should communicate everything as soon as possible and as clearly as possible, so you would not face any miscommunication once the delivery is already done, right? So you should decide the following things and inform a client about them. SQL version, of course, on which version your upgraded database will be restored. Also naming of objects and naming of files. You can see examples of default naming here, and I think that it is not exactly user-friendly, so a lot of clients want to change these. Also naming of copied standard functions, naming of event subscription functions. I really like a nice clear structure, and since extensions is a new thing and you will already have a lot of unseen things in your solution, you will most probably want to have a nice structured solution so that you would be sure how everything is called, where to find everything, and how to find it if you are searching for a specific thing, right? So you should decide all of these naming conventions up front, and also where will you place your event subscription functions. We cannot place integration event subscriptions to page extension or table extension objects, so we should place those in separate code units. How many code units will you need? And how will you know which code unit to use for what event subscription? Are you gonna create a separate code unit for pages, separate for tables, separate for code units, or will you be separating your event subscriptions by NAV module? You should consider all of those things and the most suitable approach for you. A few more things: prefixes, suffixes, code analysis tools. These are necessary if you decide to upgrade to app source. If you do not want to upgrade to app source, these are still recommended if you would like to have your solution very nicely formatted and your code easily readable, right? Also, functional testing scenarios and format of communication with the client. How often and in what format will you provide the list of issues, and how you will receive information back from the client, and if client has some functional scenarios that you can use after you have completed your upgrade. Okay, let's get into upgrade process itself. First thing that I would like to discuss is usage category. I would like to discuss this as a first topic because this actually should be done in CAL. So basically the process goes like this. Either if you are upgrading from Classic or from RTC version, you should first of all go to Business Central 14 latest cumulative update CAL version. And from there, you can move your solution to your desired target on AL to extensions, right? And since you are still on BC14CL, you should apply usage category property on all custom reports and all custom pages where needed. Why? Because we do not have such thing as menu suite in web client, right? The only thing how you can find your custom reports and custom pages is by search in web client. And you can only find them in search if you apply usage category. So usage category is basically the same thing as a department property in menu suite item. And one note regarding XML ports: sadly, you cannot call them directly from search in web client. So if you do have such XML ports, you should consider to call them from page actions, most probably during the upgrade process. And the last thing here, caption. Basically, previously we had two captions, right, in RTC versions. We had an actual object caption in, for example, custom page. And we also had a caption that can be applied in menu suite when you call this page, and it can be different than a page caption, right? Right now, we do not have such thing in web client. All we have is just page caption or report caption, and you cannot set a different caption for search. So please review if you had any reports or pages that had different captions set in menu suite and decide which caption should be applied for search in web client. If you do have a lot of solution objects, you will most probably not want to do this thing manually. So how to automate this process? First of all, it's quite easy because Microsoft has a PowerShell model that can help you out with that. You just have to run a command, and basically this PowerShell command will connect to your CAL BC14 database. It will take all custom pages, custom reports. It will check if those were called from menu suite and apply a proper usage category to them. This tool then will export all of those pages and reports in TXT format to outside folder that you will select in your PowerShell command. And the last thing that you have to do is just take all of those objects and import them back into the database. The one issue with this thing, with this tool, is that it actually exports pages and reports in TXT format one by one. If you have a lot of objects, you will not want to import them manually one by one. So for that, we are using NAV object splitter tool, which will allow you to just join all the TXT files into one huge TXT file and upload everything into your database in one time. Okay, let's move on to transformation with TXT2L. I will not go into details on how to actually transform the objects because you will find a lot of information about it. It's basically just a bunch of PowerShell and CMD commands, but I will comment on the structure of AL project. So once again, I like everything structured, nice and clear. So my recommendation here is to have source folder split it into two folders, custom and standard. Standard folder will have separate folders again for page extensions, table extensions, and report copies. What is report copies, you might ask? Since we do not have extension object for report, standard report, what you should do is you should modify standard report in BC14CL, then save it as custom, transform it with TXT2L, and just save it here in report copies, and this custom report will be called instead of a standard one. In custom folders, again, separate folders per object type, and a little bit deeper into reports. We also have a separate folders for RDLC layouts and Word layouts. And if you do have your layouts placed in a separate folder, not in a root folder of AL project, you should not forget to change RDLC layout and Word layout properties in your reports to give it the actual path of the layout. Okay, let's move on to file management. As I have already mentioned, it is a quite painful limitation upgrading to extensions, and I will not even talk about cloud version because you will have to refactor everything basically. If you're moving to cloud, you will have to choose one of online file storage services like SharePoint or OneDrive or Azure blob file storage or any other, because you will not be able to use Microsoft servers to save your files, to process your files if you are on cloud, right? But if you are on-prem, there will still be quite some things that you will have to refactor. What we have here on the slide is a list of functions from Code Unit 419, file management, that do not actually work in web client. So you can use them in code, your code will compile, everything will be fine, but once you try to actually run the object in web client, you will receive a warning that this is not supported in web client. So what you should do is find all of these functions in your solution and refactor the code. Basically, the approach right now is that we cannot work with client computer infrastructure. We cannot create, delete, modify, process files from specific folders in client computer, right? The only thing that we can do is just save those files in downloads folder. And this is actually more of a browser limitation than Business Central, but well, it is what it is, and you should inform client about it and refactor the code to just download all the files to a downloads folder on a client computer, and all the file processing can be happening on your server where database is if you are upgrading to on-premise version. Okay, a bit more things that we should refactor is obviously breaking changes. So called, it is basically changes in standard code, right? There are some things, some functions, some objects that have changed since Business Central 14 CL, right? And Microsoft actually has this great document breaking changes. So if you see in your converted solution that some function is not available, some standard function anymore, even though it was in BC14, you should just go into this document, search for the function, and you will have a nice detailed explanation on how you should change that function, where the functionality is moved, and so on. Once again, .NET and automations, I have already talked about this a little, and I will not get into more details about it. But .NET and automations are quite time consuming. I can give maybe one advice regarding most common one, Excel.NET library or Excel automation. It is quite limited in extensions, and what we have found so far, the best alternative is to use OpenXML.NET library in extensions. It actually, it seems, has the most similar and the best functionalities to re-implement everything that was done with Excel.NET or automations in previous versions. And code analysis tools, if you do decide to use these and to fix your solution based on code cop, user interface cop, or any other cop rules, I just wanted to show that it is very easy to use those. You should just create settings.json file in your AL project and enable code analysis, choose which analyzers exactly you want to enable, and it will just immediately run through your solution, and you will see a lot of warnings at the bottom of your Visual Studio Code, and you can just start working on those to align your code with code cops. Okay, the last thing is probably translation files. Translation files should be created at the very end of upgrade, I believe, because if you change places of controls or delete something during the upgrade process, translation file will also change its structure. It's basically XML, right? So everything that also be changed in that XML file. So first of all, how you should generate the source translation file, it's quite easy. You should just add a new property in app.json file. And once you will build your extension, it will create translations folder in your AL project, and it will also create a translation source file. So basically this file will have every little thing, every little caption that you should translate into another language if you would like to. And how to translate those things to another language, I would like to recommend Xlif Sync tool, which is a Visual Studio Code extension. I have found this tool to be, well, the best, at least personally for me, of all the other tools that I have tried during the time. And basically what it does, it lets you to very easily create all the required target translation files with selected language. And the best thing is that it actually allows you to import translations from other files. A little bit about this process. Basically, when you convert, for example, pages with txt to L tool, right? You will also have immediately a translation file for those pages generated. Yeah, but over the time you will modify those pages, you will fix something, add something, delete something, and that initially created translation file will not be valid anymore, right? So that's why it is great to use this tool. What it does, it actually just finds all the matching source value in your outside translation file, and if source value matches, then it just takes target value and applies it on a target translation file. So I do find it quite great, and for all the places that do not have a translation, it's also very easy to search, because this tool actually leaves this comment that target state needs translation. So afterwards you can just find all such places and apply translation manually if needed. Okay, and let's move on to testing phase. Before starting testing, you should prepare testing environments. What I do recommend here, it doesn't matter if you're using Docker container or server databases, every developer during testing phase should have a separate database that they would be able to work on. What will happen if you will have 2 or 3 developers working on the same database? They will start over publishing each other. They will start losing changes. You do not want that. So basically, best practice, just create a separate environment for every developer that is testing a solution. Okay, once you have your environments prepared, you will most probably want to test all the pages and review the layout. One thing that you should have in mind is grid layout. You might think that if you have a grid layout fixed in Business Central 14 CL version, right, in RTC, it will also work great in web client. Well, sadly not. What I have noticed is that once you convert with TXT to L tool, columns and rows, somehow they mix up. So basically, you have to run the page with the web client, check out the layout, fix grid layout a little bit, and then you have a nice working page. So I do not recommend, most probably, even to fix grid layouts in BC14 and CL versions, because you will still have to rework that once again in AL, in web client. Also, you should take a look at page parts. It was a huge issue in BC14 version extensions, but it is fixed now. So if you are upgrading to BC14 extensions, we have noticed this very bad issue that if you do have a sub page placed in a parent page, and if that sub page is not actually added to a separate group, then you are not able to navigate the sub page, you are not able to scroll the records, and you are basically not able to do anything with that page. If you add this sub page to a separate group, then everything is fine and you can easily navigate and manage that sub page. And also page types. Web client is actually very sensitive regarding page types. So if you are having issues, if you see that standard functionalities maybe for your page are not working properly, you should check if you have a correct page type applied. Moving to XML ports, I have already mentioned that you cannot call them directly from search in web client, so you should consider calling them from somewhere else, most probably page actions. And one more thing, once again, Business Central 14 limitation, XML port cannot have a request page. So if you are upgrading to Business Central 14, you should consider this, you should identify these XML ports that do have a request pages up front, because it will most probably take quite some time to implement request page functionality, and that will most probably be done using creating new custom reports and using report request page to implement XML port request page. Moving on to reports, you will of course want to test all the reports through the layout, and I wanted to share one thing actually that I have identified. I would also call it a bug, but it is still available in Business Central 17. I'm not sure, maybe it will be fixed in later versions. So if you are using code inside your report that sets a report language based on some language code, right? Basically what happened in Business Central 14 in CAL version, if language code is empty, then just the default language is selected, which is English, right? But what happens in web client, if language code is empty, then you will get a something went wrong error, right? The scariest of them all, I would say, the something went wrong error, which cannot even be debugged. And I will then mention immediately that the best thing that I have found so far for identifying what caused something went wrong error is Event Viewer. I have noticed that actually Event Viewer has quite good call stack. having listed all the functions where the code went, since you cannot debug something went wrong with a debugger, you will see the call stack of all functions in Event Viewer, and from that it's usually quite easy to identify the crashing code. And regarding the reports, getting back to reports, one more thing is that if you are actually changing the layout, RTC layout or word layout of a report, you should always use full deployment. During the testing phase, we usually use a rapid deployment because it is way faster to test, to publish your extension this way. But rapid deployment does not see layout changes, report layout changes as actual change, and it does not deploy this change to your extension. So if you have modified the layout, please use a full deployment to test your changes. Okay, so basically that is it that I have wanted to tell you today. At least that's all that I was able to tell in such short time. And I am looking forward to having a Q&A session. Please ask questions if you do have any.